was only 23 years old when I received the most heartbreaking video call of my life. There I stood in the dusty communications tent on my forward operating base in Afghanistan, staring at my phone in disbelief as my younger sister panned her camera around what used to be my bedroom. The space where I'd spent 18 years of my life, where my sports trophies, graduation photos, and childhood memories had lived, had been completely transformed into a teenage boy's paradise for my cousin Ryan. My belongings were gone, my walls repainted, and my existence in my parents' home effectively erased while I was halfway around the world serving my country. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Samantha Mitchell, and after 4 years in the Army as a communications specialist, I never imagined my greatest battle would be against my own family. Growing up in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio, I'd always been the responsible one. The daughter who followed rules, maintained a 3.9 GPA, and enlisted after high school to help pay for college and make my family proud. My parents had always emphasized the importance of self-sufficiency, which is why I'd chosen the military path, a decision they'd initially supported with American flag magnets on their car and Proud Army Parent t-shirts. When I received my deployment orders to Afghanistan, my mother had cried at the airport, and my father had given me one of his rare, tight hugs. "Your room will be waiting for you when you get back," he'd promised. "Exactly as you left it." Those words had comforted me during the long nights in the barracks, the grueling training exercises, and eventually, the tense patrols through hostile territory. I had been deployed for 7 months when I got the call from my sister Emma. She was 16, 5 years younger than me, and we'd always been close despite the age gap. She'd been messaging me about strange changes happening at home, how our cousin Ryan, my uncle's 19-year-old son, had been staying with them more frequently after his parents' divorce. Ryan had always been my parents' favorite nephew, the star athlete, the charmer who could talk his way out of anything, much like my sister's boyfriend from the original story could manipulate her parents. "Sam, I think you should see this," Emma said, her voice uncharacteristically serious as she flipped her camera to show my bedroom. Except it wasn't my bedroom anymore. The pale blue walls I'd painted myself were now a dark navy. My meticulously organized bookshelf with my favorite novels and college brochures had been replaced with gaming equipment and sports memorabilia. My bed with the handmade quilt from my grandmother was gone, replaced by a larger platform bed with Ryan's clothes strewn across it. Even the photographs I'd left on my dresser, pictures of my high school graduation, my basic training graduation, my friends from home, had vanished. "Where's my stuff?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the hum of the generators outside the communications tent. The temperature in Afghanistan was well over 100 degrees, but I felt cold all over. "Mom and Dad moved everything to the garage," Emma replied, her camera shaking slightly as she walked. "They said since you weren't going to be home for at least another year with your deployment and then your training, it didn't make sense to keep your room empty when Ryan needed a place to stay." The camera panned to show several cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly in the corner of our garage, some already showing water damage from a recent rainstorm. A box labeled Sam's Awards had collapsed on one side, and I could see the corner of my high school diploma poking out, its frame cracked. "They didn't even tell me," I whispered, aware that my battle buddies were giving me concerned looks from their stations across the tent. "They promised my room would be waiting for me." Emma's face reappeared on screen, her expression a mix of anger and sympathy. "I tried to stop them, Sam, I really did. But you know how they get when they've made up their minds. They said you're an adult now, and Ryan needed the stability, since his parents' divorce has been so hard on him." The conversation ended abruptly when I was called for an emergency communications task, but the image of my life packed away in water-damaged boxes stayed with me for days. I tried calling my parents that weekend during my designated phone time, but the conversation went even worse than I'd anticipated. "It's just a room." "Samantha," my mother said dismissively, "you're a grown woman serving overseas. Ryan is going through a difficult time right now. He needs family support more than you need a shrine maintained to your childhood." "It's not about having a shrine," I argued, trying to keep my voice steady despite the hurt building in my chest. "It's about having a place to come home to after risking my life every day in a war zone. It's about the promise you made when I left." "Well, plans change. my father interjected, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. Ryan's staying with us indefinitely now. His father's moved to Cincinnati for work, and his mother's new apartment is too small. Besides, you're getting housing allowance from the military. You can find your own place when you get back. The callousness of their response stunned me into silence. I'd spent my entire life trying to make them proud, following their rules, excelling in school, serving my country, only to be treated as though I was being unreasonable for expecting them to keep their word. What about my belongings? I finally asked. Emma showed me they're in the garage. Some of them are already damaged from the moisture. We'll go through them eventually, my mother replied vaguely. Ryan needed the space cleared quickly, and you know how small our house is. There's just nowhere else to put things right now. After the call ended, I sat alone on my bunk, surrounded by the sparse belongings I'd brought to Afghanistan, a few photos, some letters from home, a worn paperback I'd read 3 times already. Everything else I owned was deteriorating in a garage halfway around the world, deemed less important than my cousin's comfort. That night I wrote a long entry in my journal, trying to process the betrayal I felt. Growing up, I'd always been taught that family came first, that we supported each other through everything. Now I was learning that lesson had an asterisk beside it. Family came first, except when someone else's needs were deemed more important than mine. The next morning, I approached Staff Sergeant Melissa Rodriguez, my direct supervisor and someone I'd grown to trust during our deployment. She'd served 3 tours already and had a reputation for taking care of her soldiers, both on and off the battlefield. Permission to speak freely, Staff Sergeant? I asked after completing my morning duties. Always, Mitchell, she replied, noticing my reddened eyes. What's going on? I explained the situation, feeling embarrassed to be bringing personal problems into a war zone, but unable to keep carrying the weight of the betrayal alone. To my surprise, rather than dismissing my concerns as trivial compared to our mission, Rodriguez listened intently, her expression darkening as I described how my belongings were being damaged and how my parents had broken their promise. That's not right, Mitchell, she said firmly when I'd finished. Every soldier deserves to know they have a home to come back to. It's what gets us through the tough days out here. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Rodriguez shared that she'd experienced something similar during her first deployment, returning to find her apartment sublet and her possessions moved without her consent. I wish I'd had someone to advocate for me back then, she said. Let me see what I can do. I tried to focus on my duties in the days that followed, but the sense of betrayal lingered. Each video call with Emma revealed more distressing news. Ryan had been given my car to use temporarily since I wasn't there to drive it, despite the fact that I'd been making payments on it from my deployment pay. My high school yearbooks had been damaged when a pipe leaked in the garage. My childhood stuffed animals, which I'd hoped to pass down to my own children someday, had developed mold from the damp conditions. Meanwhile, Ryan had settled into my room completely, even adding built-in shelving that required drilling into the walls, changes that made it clear my parents never intended this to be a temporary arrangement. They'd given him free rein to alter the space permanently, erasing any trace that it had once been mine. 2 weeks after my conversation with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, she called me into her office. Captain James Harrington, our company commander, was there waiting for us. Captain Harrington was a tall, imposing figure with 20 years of military experience, known for his fair but no-nonsense approach to leadership. Mitchell, he said as I stood at attention, at ease. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has brought a concerning situation to my attention. I'd like to hear about it directly from you. I hesitated, suddenly feeling like I'd overstepped by sharing my personal problems. Sir, it's a family matter. I don't want to waste your time with... Soldier, he interrupted firmly. Nothing that affects the well-being and peace of mind of one of my troops is a waste of my time. Tell me what's happening. So I did, laying out the whole situation. The broken promise, my belongings deteriorating in the garage, my car being used without proper permission, and the permanent changes being made to my room. As I spoke, Captain Harrington's expression remained neutral, but I noticed his jaw tightening. Do you have documentation? showing you're making the car payments?" he asked when I finished. "Yes, sir. It's in my name, but my parents are on the insurance since it's registered at their address." He nodded thoughtfully. "And these belongings in the garage, are we talking about a few childhood toys or significant personal property?" "Sir, it's everything I own apart from what I brought here. My clothes, my computer, books, important documents, keepsakes, awards, my whole life." Captain Harrington exchanged a look with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez before turning back to me. "Mitchell, are you familiar with the Service Members Civil Relief Act?" I shook my head. It's federal law that provides legal protections for military personnel. While it doesn't specifically address your exact situation, there are provisions that protect service members' property while they're deployed. He leaned forward slightly. "More importantly, there are resources available through military family support services that can intervene in situations like yours." He stood up, his decision apparently made. "With your permission, I'd like to make a call to your parents." My stomach dropped at the thought of my company commander calling my family. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but I don't want to cause trouble. They're still my parents, and—" "Mitchell," he interrupted, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it, "this isn't about causing trouble. This is about ensuring that the soldiers under my command aren't distracted by unnecessary stressors while serving in a combat zone. Your focus should be on your mission and staying alive, not worrying about whether your childhood memories are being destroyed back home." After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. "Yes, sir, thank you. I'll need their contact information, and I'll need you to be present for this call." That evening, after our duties were complete, I found myself sitting in Captain Harrington's office as he dialed my parents' number on the secure line. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it across the desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, this is Captain James Harrington, United States Army." His voice had transformed into something I'd never heard before. Not the commanding tone he used with soldiers or the respectful one he used with superior officers, but something with steel beneath perfect politeness. "I'm calling regarding your daughter, Specialist Samantha Mitchell, who is currently serving under my command in Afghanistan." There was a pause as my father said something I couldn't hear. "No, sir, Specialist Mitchell is perfectly fine physically. She's an exemplary soldier performing her duties admirably under difficult conditions. I'm calling about another matter entirely." Another pause. "I understand you've made some changes to your household arrangements during your daughter's deployment." I could hear my father's voice rising through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. "Mr. Mitchell?" Captain Harrington interrupted calmly. "With all due respect, I need to make something very clear. When one of my soldiers is deployed to a combat zone, their ability to focus on their mission is paramount, not just for their safety, but for the safety of every soldier around them. Distractions can be deadly here." He listened for a moment before continuing. "Sir, I've been informed that significant personal property belonging to Specialist Mitchell is currently being stored in conditions that are causing damage. I've also been informed that a vehicle titled in her name is being used without proper documentation, and that permanent alterations are being made to what was understood to be her personal space, contrary to assurances she was given before deployment." My mother's voice came through now, high-pitched and defensive, though again I couldn't make out the exact words. "Ma'am," Captain Harrington responded, his tone unchanged. "I understand family circumstances can be complicated. However, as Specialist Mitchell's commanding officer, I have a responsibility to address situations that affect her well-being and, by extension, our unit's operational readiness." He straightened in his chair. "I'm not calling to debate family dynamics. I'm calling to inform you that Military Family Support Services will be contacting you within 48 hours to discuss proper storage of a deployed service member's possessions. They'll also provide information about the legal implications of using a vehicle titled to an active duty service member without proper authorization during deployment." There was silence on the other end now. "Additionally," he continued, "I want to emphasize that Specialist Mitchell has shown remarkable restraint and professionalism in how she's handled this situation. Many soldiers would have been unable to perform their duties effectively under similar circumstances. You should be extraordinarily proud of the woman and soldier your daughter has become." I felt a lump forming in my throat at his words. "Now, Specialist Mitchell is here with me if you'd like to speak with her directly about resolving this situation in a way that respects her service and property rights." He handed me the phone, and for the first time in my adult life, I heard my father at a loss for words. "Samantha," he finally said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. We didn't realize this was such a serious matter." "It is serious to me, Dad," I replied, finding strength in Captain Harrington's unwavering presence across the desk. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm just asking for what you promised, a place for me and my belongings when I come home." "Your captain makes it sound like we've broken some kind of law," my mother interjected, defensiveness creeping back into her voice. "This isn't about laws, Mom. It's about respect. I'm over here doing a job that takes me away from everything familiar, everything safe. All I asked was for my things to be protected until I return." There was a long pause before my father spoke again. We'll move your things out of the garage immediately. And we'll talk to Ryan about finding other arrangements." "And my car?" I pressed, emboldened by the silent support from my commander. "We'll park it in the garage," my father conceded. "No one will drive it without your explicit permission." After the call ended, I sat in stunned silence. In 10 minutes, Captain Harrington had accomplished what I hadn't been able to in weeks of upset calls and messages. "Thank you, sir," I finally managed. "I don't know what to say." Captain Harrington's professional demeanor softened slightly. "Mitchell, do you know why I was so direct with your parents?" "Because of unit readiness, sir?" "That's part of it," he acknowledged. "But there's more. When someone serves their country, they're making a sacrifice that less than 1% of Americans ever make. That sacrifice deserves respect. Not just from the general public with their 'thank you for your service' comments, but most importantly from the people who are supposed to love and support them the most." He leaned forward, his expression serious. "In my 20 years of service, I've seen too many young soldiers distracted or heartbroken by what happens back home while they're deployed. Some of those distractions have led to mistakes that cost lives. So yes, this is about readiness, but it's also about fundamental respect for your service." As I left his office that evening, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time since that devastating video call, I could focus entirely on my duties without the constant ache of betrayal distracting me. The next day, Emma sent me photos of my father and uncle carefully moving my belongings from the garage into my parents' dry, climate-controlled basement. My mother was carefully laying out my water-damaged books to dry, and my car had been parked in the garage with a cover over it. Ryan, according to Emma, had been told he had 3 weeks to find alternative arrangements. "What did your commander say to them?" Emma asked during our next call. "Dad hasn't stopped apologizing to me for letting this happen, and Mom actually yelled at Uncle Dave when he complained about Ryan having to move." I smiled, thinking of Captain Harrington's unwavering calm and the absolute authority in his voice. He just reminded them of what really matters. In the months that followed, my relationship with my parents slowly began to heal. They sent care packages with heartfelt letters acknowledging how their actions had made me feel. My father sent photos of the repairs he'd made to my damaged belongings and the climate-controlled storage system he'd installed in the basement for my things. My mother called more regularly, asking genuine questions about my experiences rather than treating my deployment as an inconvenience to the family. By the time I returned home a year later, my room had been restored. Not exactly as I'd left it, but with care and consideration. Ryan had moved in with friends, my car waited untouched in the garage, and my belongings had been carefully preserved. More importantly, there was a new respect in my parents' eyes when they looked at me, not just for the uniform I wore, but for the boundaries I'd finally found the courage to establish. Captain Harrington's single phone call hadn't just secured my physical possessions. It had fundamentally changed how my family viewed my service and my place in their lives. Sometimes I realized it takes an outside voice to make people recognize the value of what's right in front of them, and the true meaning of respect for those who serve. The consequences of Captain Harrington's phone call rippled through my life in ways I never could have anticipated. In the days following his intervention, the transformation in my parents' attitude was so dramatic it almost gave me emotional whiplash. My mother, who had dismissed my concerns as childish attachment to a room, was now sending daily updates about the restoration of my belongings. My father, who had barely acknowledged my deployment beyond occasional perfunctory emails, was suddenly engaged in lengthy video calls detailing the climate-controlled storage system he'd installed in the basement. The contrast between their previous dismissal and their current overcorrection was jarring. While I appreciated the change, part of me couldn't help wondering, why had it taken the voice of a military authority figure to make them value what I had been saying all along? 3 days after Captain Harrington's call, I was conducting routine maintenance checks on our communications equipment when Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached me. "Mitchell," she said, "someone from the Military Family Support Center stateside reached out to your parents yesterday. Apparently, your father tried to argue that the car situation wasn't that serious, and the support specialist reminded him that unauthorized use of a service member's vehicle during deployment could potentially be reported to the DMV and insurance company as unauthorized use." A small smile crossed her face. "Suddenly, your father became very cooperative." I couldn't help but laugh, imagining my father, who prided himself on always being the authority in any room, being firmly put in his place by yet another military official. I never thought I'd see the day when my dad would be the one getting schooled on responsibility. Rodriguez's expression grew more serious. "Your situation isn't uncommon, Mitchell. Many soldiers come home to find their lives rearranged in ways large and small. The difference is you had the courage to speak up before irreversible damage was done." Her words stayed with me throughout the day. I had always been taught that enduring discomfort silently was a virtue, that voicing concerns was equivalent to complaining. The military had reinforced some of those beliefs with its emphasis on stoicism and resilience. But here was my staff sergeant telling me that speaking up hadn't been weakness. It had been courage. That evening, I received a video call from Emma that further illustrated the seismic shift occurring back home. She panned her camera around the basement where my father had created what looked like a small museum for my belongings. My clothes were hanging in garment bags to protect them from dust. My books had been carefully dried and arranged on new shelving. Even my collection of softball trophies had been displayed on a specially built shelf. "Dad's been down here every night this week," Emma narrated as she showed me around. "Mom keeps saying he's overcompensating, but honestly, Sam, I've never seen him work this hard on anything that wasn't his own project." The camera turned to show Emma's face, her expression a mix of amusement and disbelief. "And you won't believe what happened with Ryan. Uncle Dave showed up yesterday, furious that Ryan was being kicked out. He and Dad got into this huge argument in the driveway. I could hear them from my bedroom." "What happened?" I asked, both dreading and curious to know how my father had handled the confrontation. "Dad stood his ground." Emma's eyes widened as if she still couldn't believe it. "He told Uncle Dave that respecting your service and your property was non-negotiable. He actually said, 'My daughter is risking her life for this country while your son is playing video games in her room. Which one deserves our support right now?'" I nearly dropped my phone. My father, who had always favored my uncle's family over his own daughters, was defending my rights. It was as if Captain Harrington's call had forced him to see me, really see me, for the first time in my adult life. "Ryan's moving in with his friend next weekend," Emma continued. "He tried to argue that he should at least be able to keep using your car since he has a job now, and the buses are inconvenient." Mom actually laughed in his face and said, "Inconvenient? Try walking patrol in 110-degree heat wearing 70 pounds of gear. That's inconvenient." The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, my parents had minimized my accomplishments while celebrating Ryan's mediocrity. Now they were using my service as a measuring stick that my cousin couldn't hope to reach. "How do you feel about all this?" I asked Emma, suddenly concerned about how this family drama was affecting my younger sister. Emma's expression sobered. "Honestly, it's weird. It's like Captain Harrington's call flipped some switch in Mom and Dad's brains. But," she hesitated. "But what?" "But I'm also kind of angry on your behalf. Why did it take your commander calling for them to respect you? I've been telling them the same things for months. and they just dismissed me. Why wasn't our family's word enough? Her question echoed my own thoughts. I don't know, Em. I really don't. Before we could discuss it further, I was called away for an unexpected mission briefing. As I hurried across the base, Emma's question continued to resonate. Why hadn't my voice been enough? Why had it taken an outside authority figure to validate concerns that should have been taken seriously from the beginning? The answer, I suspected, lay in my family's long-established dynamics. I had always been the responsible one, the daughter who caused no trouble, who met expectations without complaint. That role had become so entrenched that my parents couldn't see beyond it, couldn't recognize that the responsible daughter had legitimate grievances that deserved attention. 2 weeks after Captain Harrington's intervention, I received a handwritten letter from my mother, something so rare in our age of texts and emails that I initially thought it might contain bad news. Instead, it contained something even more unexpected, an apology. Dear Samantha, she wrote in her neat, teacher's handwriting. I've started this letter a dozen times and torn it up just as many. No words seem adequate to express how ashamed I am of how your father and I treated you. We convinced ourselves we were making a practical decision about space in our home. But the truth is, we failed to honor our promise to you and, more importantly, failed to honor your service. The letter continued for several pages, detailing how Captain Harrington's call had forced them to confront their behavior not just toward me, but toward both their daughters. We've always expected more from you because you've always been capable of more, my mother admitted. But somewhere along the way, higher expectations turned into taking you for granted, assuming you would be okay with whatever we decided because you've always been so independent. She described how they'd been attending a support group for military families at the suggestion of the Military Family Support Center. We're learning how many service members struggle to reintegrate after deployment, partly because of changes at home they weren't prepared for. The thought that we were adding to that struggle for you breaks my heart. The letter concluded with a promise, not about my room or my belongings, but about something more fundamental. We're committed to seeing you clearly, Samantha, not just as the responsible daughter or the soldier, but as a young woman with her own needs and rights. I hope someday you can forgive us for how long it's taken us to learn this lesson. I read the letter 3 times, emotions swirling too intensely to name. There was relief that my parents were finally acknowledging their behavior, gratitude for Captain Harrington's intervention, and lingering hurt that it had taken such extreme measures to be heard. But beneath all those feelings was something new and fragile, hope that my relationship with my parents might evolve into something healthier than it had ever been. As the weeks passed, the situation at home continued to stabilize. Ryan moved out as promised, though not without drama. According to Emma, he'd attempted to take several of my possessions with him, claiming they'd been gifts. My mother had personally inspected everything he packed, requiring him to return my portable speaker, desk lamp, and several books he'd tried to appropriate. My car remained safely in the garage, unused except for occasional starts to keep the battery charged. My father sent weekly updates about the restoration of my water-damaged belongings, including professional restoration of my high school diploma and careful repair of my grandmother's quilt. More significantly, both my parents began engaging with me differently during our calls. Instead of brief check-ins focused on surface-level updates, they asked thoughtful questions about my experiences. They wanted to know about the friends I'd made, the challenges I faced, the places I'd seen, even the difficult aspects of deployment I'd previously kept to myself, knowing they wouldn't want to hear about the realities of war. We're trying to understand what your life is really like here, my father explained during one call. For too long, we've thought of your deployment as something happening to our family, rather than something you're experiencing firsthand. This new awareness extended to practical matters as well. When I mentioned offhandedly that the desert dust was destroying my skin, a care package arrived 2 weeks later with high-quality moisturizers and sunscreen. When I talked about missing home-cooked meals, they arranged for a local restaurant to deliver a hot dinner to our base for my squad, a logistical feat that must have required significant effort and coordination with military channels. These changes should have been entirely positive, but the radical transformation in my parents' behavior created its own kind of stress. I found myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for them to revert to old patterns once the novelty of their awakening wore off. Each video call began with a knot of tension in my stomach. Was this the day they'd tell me Ryan was moving back in after all? That they'd grown tired of maintaining my belongings? That the effort to truly see and respect me had become too exhausting to sustain? I shared these concerns with Captain Harrington during one of our weekly check-ins. After his intervention, he'd made a point of following up regularly on the situation, understanding that family issues could affect performance even from thousands of miles away. "It's not unusual to feel suspicious of sudden change, Mitchell," he observed after listening to my concerns. "Trust, once broken, isn't repaired overnight, especially when it was broken by people who are supposed to be your strongest support system." "So what do I do, sir?" I asked. I want to believe they've really changed, but part of me is just waiting for everything to go back to how it was. Captain Harrington considered this for a moment. "In the military, we don't evaluate soldiers based on promises or intentions. We evaluate them based on consistent performance over time. Maybe you need to apply the same standard here." His advice made sense. Rather than trying to force myself to trust my parents' transformation immediately, I could observe their actions over time, looking for consistency rather than intensity. This approach gave me permission to remain cautiously optimistic while protecting myself from potential disappointment. As my deployment progressed, my parents continued to demonstrate their commitment to change. They maintained regular communication, respected my boundaries, and took tangible steps to prepare for my eventual return. My room was being restored, not to its exact former state, but to a more adult space that would suit my needs when I came home on leave. 4 months after Captain Harrington's call, I received news that would test my parents' newfound respect for my independence. Due to changes in unit assignments, I was being offered the opportunity to extend my deployment by 6 months. The extension came with additional benefits: specialized training that would enhance my promotion potential, a significant bonus, and the chance to see a crucial project through to completion. Professionally, it was an opportunity I wanted to accept. But I hesitated, wondering how my parents would react. Would they see this as a betrayal after all their efforts to prepare for my return? Would they guilt me about choosing my career over family time? The old dynamics threatened to reassert themselves in my mind, making it difficult to separate what I wanted from what I feared. After several days of deliberation, I decided to discuss the extension offer with my parents directly. It would be a litmus test of sorts, a chance to see whether their transformation was genuine or merely a performance intended to appease military authorities. I scheduled a video call with both of them, butterflies churning in my stomach as their faces appeared on screen. After some general catching up, I took a deep breath and shared the news about the potential extension. "It's completely my decision," I explained, watching their expressions carefully. "The Army won't pressure me either way, but professionally, it makes sense for my career trajectory. The training alone would normally take years to qualify for." I braced myself for disappointment, guilt-tripping, perhaps even anger. Instead, my father leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do, Samantha?" he asked simply. The directness of the question caught me off guard. I think I want to accept it," I admitted, "but I'm concerned about how it affects plans back home." My mother smiled, though I could see a hint of sadness in her eyes. "We'll miss you terribly for those extra months. But this is your career, your life. If this extension is what's best for your future, then that's what matters. We'll keep everything ready for whenever you do come home," my father added. Whether that's in 2 months or 8. Their support was so unexpected that I found myself momentarily speechless. This was the clearest evidence yet that something fundamental had shifted in our relationship, that they were finally seeing me as an adult with agency over my own life, rather than a daughter whose decisions should be subject to their approval. "Thank you," I finally managed. "That means a lot." After the call ended, I sat in the quiet of the communications center, processing what had just occurred. For the first time in my adult life, I had made a major decision without the weight of my parents' expectations influencing my choice. The freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. I accepted the extension the next day, committing to another 6 months in Afghanistan. As word spread through my unit, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez pulled me aside after formation. "I heard you're staying on for the extension," she said, studying my face. Good choice for your career. How did the folks back home take it? Surprisingly well, I replied, still somewhat amazed by the fact. They actually supported my decision completely. Rodriguez nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. Captain Harrington's call may have started the change, but this is something more. This is them finally seeing you as the adult you've become. Her words crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't fully articulated. The room situation had been a symptom of a larger issue: my parents' inability to recognize my transition from dependent child to independent adult. Captain Harrington's intervention had forced them to see me through someone else's eyes, to recognize the respect I commanded in my professional life, and to question why I wasn't receiving the same respect at home. In the months that followed, I settled into my extended deployment with a new sense of peace. The constant background anxiety about my place in my parents' home had diminished, allowing me to focus more fully on my duties and the specialized training I'd now have access to. My relationship with my parents continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Rather than merely maintaining my space and possessions, they began actively engaging with my future plans. When I mentioned considering college courses after my deployment, my father researched GI Bill benefits and sent information about universities with strong programs in my field of interest. When I expressed concern about the housing market for when I eventually left the service, my mother connected me with a financial advisor who specialized in helping veterans plan for civilian life. Small gestures spoke volumes about their changing perspective. My birthday package included not just treats and necessities, but also a handcrafted wooden box my father had made specifically to store my military medals and ribbons, a tangible acknowledgement of accomplishments he'd previously minimized. My mother sent a journal filled with family recipes she'd transcribed, with a note saying, "For wherever home is when you're ready to make these your own." 6 months after Captain Harrington's call, I received a message from Ryan, the first direct communication since the room situation had unfolded. I opened it with trepidation, expecting resentment or accusations. "Hey Samantha," he wrote. "I should have reached out sooner, but honestly, I was pretty embarrassed about how everything went down. I never meant to disrespect your service or your space. I guess I didn't really think about what it meant that you were deployed. It was just a room that was empty to me, not something you were counting on coming back to." His message continued, describing how he'd found an apartment with friends and was working full-time while taking community college classes. "Your dad talks about you all the time now," he added. "It made me realize I need to get my act together too. I've enlisted in the Air Force, heading to basic training next month. I probably don't deserve it, but any advice you could give would be appreciated." The message left me with complicated feelings. Part of me remained angry at how entitled he'd been with my possessions and space. Another part recognized that Ryan, like everyone in my family, had been operating within the dysfunctional dynamics we'd all created and sustained over years. After consideration, I sent a brief but cordial response, offering some practical advice about basic training without fully absolving him of responsibility for his actions. Setting boundaries didn't mean holding grudges, but it also didn't require pretending the hurt had never happened. As my extended deployment neared its end, the true test of my parents' transformation approached. Would the respect and consideration they'd shown from a distance translate to our in-person interactions? Or would old patterns reassert themselves once we were under the same roof? I discussed these concerns during my final session with the deployment counselor who had helped me process the situation throughout the year. "Family dynamics are deeply ingrained," the counselor acknowledged. "But remember that you've changed during this deployment too. You're returning with new boundaries, new expectations, and new confidence in advocating for yourself. Those changes will influence how your family interacts with you just as much as their own evolution." Her words reminded me that relationships aren't static. They're constantly being renegotiated through our interactions. The patterns that had defined my family for decades had been disrupted, creating an opportunity to establish healthier dynamics going forward. 2 weeks before my scheduled return, I received photos of my restored room. My parents had consulted with Emma about what would be most useful for me now, creating a space that honored both my past and my present. The walls had been repainted in a color I'd once mentioned liking. A new desk provided space for the college coursework I planned to begin. My childhood bookshelf remained, now filled with both my old favorites and new titles related to my expressed interests. Most touchingly, they'd created a small display area for my military achievements, my unit patch, a framed photo of me with my squad, and space for the commendation I'd received during the deployment. This simple gesture acknowledged something my parents had previously seemed unable to grasp, that my military service wasn't just something I was doing until real life began, but an integral part of my identity and accomplishments. As my deployment drew to a close, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past 15 months. What had begun as a painful betrayal had catalyzed growth and change that might never have occurred otherwise. Captain Harrington's phone call had been the spark, but the transformation that followed, in my parents, in our relationship, and in my own willingness to advocate for myself, had required sustained effort from all of us. I couldn't know for certain what awaited me when I stepped off the plane into my hometown. Family patterns have a way of reasserting themselves in moments of stress or change. But I was returning with something I hadn't had when I deployed, the knowledge that I deserved respect, not just for the uniform I wore, but for the person I had become. Whatever challenges lay ahead in reintegrating with my family, I would face them not as the daughter desperate for approval, but as a soldier who had learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones we fight for our own dignity and worth. The day I returned home was nothing like I had imagined during those long nights in Afghanistan. After 15 months deployed, my original tour, plus the 6-month extension, I stepped off the plane at Columbus International Airport, with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Would my parents revert to old patterns once I was physically present? Would the respect they'd shown from a distance evaporate once I was standing before them? I needn't have worried. As I emerged from the secure area in my ACUs, I spotted them immediately. My father holding a handmade sign that read, "Welcome Home Specialist Mitchell," with my unit insignia carefully painted beside the words. My mother stood next to him, clutching a bouquet of yellow roses, my favorite. And beside them, to my surprise, stood Emma and several of my high school friends who'd remained in town. There were no awkward hesitations, no uncomfortable distance. My father wrapped me in a bear hug so tight it nearly crushed my ribs, his eyes suspiciously bright when he finally released me. My mother's embrace followed, gentler but no less heartfelt. "We are so proud of you, Samantha," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. Not welcome back or glad you're home, acknowledgments of my return, but recognition of what I had accomplished while away. The distinction wasn't lost on me. The drive home was filled with easy conversation, my parents asking thoughtful questions about my flight and final days on base, rather than immediately pulling me into family dramas or household concerns. Emma sat beside me in the back seat, occasionally squeezing my hand as if reassuring herself I was really there. When we turned onto our street, I felt a momentary tightening in my chest. This neighborhood held memories of both belonging and alienation, the place where I'd grown up loved but not always seen. As we pulled into the driveway, I noticed small changes to the house. Fresh paint on the shutters, new landscaping in the front yard, an American flag hanging beside the front door that hadn't been there when I left. "We thought the place could use some sprucing up for your return," my father explained, noticing my gaze. Emma helped pick the colors. Inside, the changes were even more apparent. The living room had been rearranged to create a more open, welcoming space. Family photos that had once favored images of Brittany now included more balanced representation, including several of me in uniform that had never been displayed before. "We have something to show you," my mother said, an uncharacteristic nervousness in her voice. She glanced at my father, who nodded encouragingly. They led me upstairs to my old room, pausing outside the closed door. "We wanted to make sure you had a space that felt like yours," my father explained. "Not just a shrine to your high school years, but somewhere that respects who you are now." When they opened the door, I couldn't help but gasp. The room had been completely transformed from the teenage girl's bedroom I'd left behind, yet it still felt unmistakably mine. The walls were painted a soothing sage green, a color I'd mentioned liking during one of our video calls. A new queen-sized bed replaced my old twin, with a handmade quilt in muted blues and greens folded neatly at its foot. The bookshelves held my old favorites alongside new titles related to interests I'd developed during deployment. A sleek desk by the window provided space for the college coursework I planned to begin. Most touchingly, one wall featured a tasteful display of my military achievements, my unit patch, photos with my squad, and my service commendations professionally framed. "Is it okay?" my mother asked anxiously. "We tried to create something that would feel right for you now, not just who you were when you left." "It's perfect," I managed, emotion making my voice rough. "Thank you." That first evening home set the tone for the weeks that followed. Rather than expecting me to immediately readjust to civilian life and family routines, my parents created space for me to decompress and reacclimate at my own pace. When noise from the neighborhood kids playing basketball triggered a moment of hypervigilance, my father quietly closed the windows, without comment or judgment. When I woke at 05:00, unable to break the habit of early military mornings, my mother joined me for coffee, instead of suggesting I try to sleep in. These small considerations spoke volumes about the depth of their transformation. They weren't just accommodating my presence. They were actively trying to understand my experience and respond to my needs, many of which I hadn't articulated and was only beginning to recognize myself. 2 weeks after my return, while helping my father with yard work, an activity that gave us time together without the pressure of constant conversation, he brought up the subject that had hovered unspoken between us. "I've been trying to understand why it took your commander's call to make us see what we were doing," he said, pausing in his task of trimming the hedges. "I've thought about it almost daily since then. I stopped raking, uncertain how to respond. Part of me had wanted to avoid this conversation, to accept the positive changes without excavating the painful history that preceded them. Another part needed to hear whatever insights my father had gained. I think I finally figured it out," he continued when I remained silent. "We never really saw your military service as real." The bluntness of his admission startled me. "What do you mean?" He set down his trimmers, giving me his full attention. "For your mother and me, the military was something distant, something that happened on the news or in movies. When you enlisted, we saw it as a detour, not a career. A way to pay for college, not a meaningful choice in itself." He shook his head, regret evident in his expression. "We treated your deployment like you were away at camp, not serving in a war zone. We didn't respect it because we didn't truly comprehend it." His words resonated with observations I'd made, but never voiced. My parents had never attended military family events, had shown minimal interest in learning about my training or responsibilities, had treated my service as a temporary phase rather than a significant part of my identity. "When Captain Harrington called," my father continued, "he made your service real to us in a way nothing else had. He wasn't just a voice on the phone. He was a direct connection to the world you were living in, a world with its own rules, values, and dangers that we had refused to fully acknowledge." I nodded slowly, recognizing the truth in his assessment. "It shouldn't have taken that to make you see me, though." "No," he agreed quietly. "It shouldn't have. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life." We worked in silence for several minutes, the rhythmic sound of raking leaves filling the space between us. Finally, I asked the question that had lingered since I'd first seen my restored room. "Why, Ryan? Why was his comfort always prioritized over mine, even before I enlisted?" My father's hands stilled. For a moment, I thought he might offer a deflection or defense, falling back on old patterns. Instead, he sighed deeply and sat down on the garden bench, gesturing for me to join him. "That's a fair question, and you deserve an honest answer." He looked out over the yard, collecting his thoughts. "Your uncle and our relationship has always been complicated. He was the favored son growing up. Athletic, popular, the one who seemed to succeed effortlessly while I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. This revelation surprised me. My father had always seemed so confident, so certain of his place in the world. I'd never imagined him struggling with the same dynamics I'd experienced. When Dave's marriage started falling apart and Ryan needed support, I think part of me saw it as a chance to finally be the successful brother, the one with the stable home who could step in and help. I convinced myself we were just being compassionate family members, but in reality, he trailed off, shaking his head. In reality? I prompted. In reality, I was using Ryan to prove something to my brother. I was so focused on being the hero in that relationship that I completely overlooked my responsibilities to my own daughters. He met my gaze directly. It was wrong, Samantha. Deeply wrong. And I'm so sorry. The frank acknowledgement of the dynamics I'd sensed but never fully understood was both painful and healing. For years, I'd wondered if I was imagining the preferential treatment shown to my cousin, if I was being oversensitive or selfish for resenting it. Hearing my father confirm the reality validated my experience in a way that felt profoundly important. "Thank you for telling me that," I said finally. "It helps make sense of things I never understood." As we returned to our yard work, I felt something shift between us. A new honesty that created space for a more authentic relationship moving forward. The conversation wasn't a magical resolution to years of complex family dynamics, but it was a foundation upon which we could build something healthier. Similar moments of reckoning and reconnection occurred with my mother in the weeks that followed. During a shopping trip that had originally been planned as a simple errand, we found ourselves sitting in a coffee shop, touching on truths that had long gone unspoken. "I always held you to a higher standard," she admitted, after I questioned why she'd been so quick to dismiss my concerns about my room when I'd called from Afghanistan. "From the time you were little, you seemed so capable, so self-sufficient. I convinced myself you didn't need the same attention or validation that other children did." "But I did need those things," I said quietly. "I just got tired of asking for them." She reached across the table to cover my hand with hers, her eyes filling with tears. "I know that now, and I can't undo those years of taking your strength for granted. But I can promise to do better going forward." These conversations weren't easy. They required vulnerability from both sides and a willingness to acknowledge painful truths. But they were necessary for building authentic relationships based on who we actually were, not the roles we'd been assigned in our family narrative. As weeks turned into months, my reintegration into civilian life progressed with its expected challenges and triumphs. Using my GI Bill benefits, I enrolled in college courses, pursuing the degree in cybersecurity that my military training had inspired. The discipline and focus I'd developed in the Army served me well in academia, though adjusting to the less structured environment required patience. My relationship with my parents continued to evolve, marked by moments of connection and occasional tensions as we navigated our new dynamics. Old patterns sometimes resurfaced during stressful periods, my mother occasionally slipping into dismissing my concerns, my father briefly reverting to authoritarian decision-making, but these instances became opportunities for growth rather than evidence of failure. The true test of our transformed relationship came 6 months after my return, when I received an unexpected job offer from a cybersecurity firm in Chicago. The position would allow me to work while completing my degree, would provide valuable experience in my chosen field, and would pay significantly more than my part-time campus job. It would also require moving 2 hours away from my parents' home. In the past, such a decision would have been fraught with guilt and complicated family emotions. I would have anticipated resistance, perhaps even manipulation to keep me close by. Instead, when I shared the news over dinner, my parents' response demonstrated how far we'd come. "That's an incredible opportunity," my father said, genuine pride in his voice. "The company would be lucky to have you." "Will you have help finding an apartment?" my mother asked, focusing on practical support rather than objections. "We could take a weekend to drive up and look at neighborhoods if that would be helpful." Their immediate acceptance of my decision, their assumption that my life choices were mine to make without their approval or permission, felt like the culmination of the journey we'd begun with Captain Harrington's phone call more than a year earlier. I accepted the position, and with my parents' enthusiastic help, found a small but comfortable apartment within my budget. On moving day, they drove me to Chicago, helped arrange furniture, and stocked my kitchen with essentials before saying their goodbyes. Supportive but not hovering, involved but not controlling. As I settled into my new home that evening, I received a text from my father. "Your mother and I were just saying how proud we are of the woman you've become, not because of us, but often in spite of us. Your room at home will always be there when you want it, but we know your real place is wherever you choose to build your life." The message brought tears to my eyes, representing everything I'd once needed but never expected to receive from my parents. recognition of my autonomy, respect for my choices, and love without conditions or expectations. That night, I video called Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, now Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, after her recent promotion. We'd maintained contact after my deployment ended, her mentorship evolving into friendship, as we both transitioned to new phases in our military and civilian lives. "So the Chicago move is official," she observed, taking in my new surroundings. "How did the folks handle it?" "Better than I ever could have imagined," I admitted. "They helped me move, didn't guilt-trip me once, and seemed genuinely happy for me." Rodriguez smiled. "Sounds like Captain Harrington's call had quite the ripple effect." "It changed everything," I agreed, "but not in the way I expected. It wasn't just about getting my room back or having my belongings protected. It was about finally being seen for who I am, not just the role I've played in my family." "That's the thing about standing up for yourself," Rodriguez observed. "You think you're fighting for something specific. A room, respect for your property, whatever. But what you're really fighting for is the right to define your own place in the world." Her words crystallized something I'd been feeling, but hadn't fully articulated. The battle that had begun with a painful video call showing my transformed bedroom had never really been about the physical space. It had been about claiming my right to exist as a full person with needs and boundaries worthy of respect, both when I was present and when I was not. In the months that followed, I built a life in Chicago that reflected my evolving identity. Part soldier, part student, part professional, all on my own terms. My relationship with my parents strengthened through regular visits and calls, now characterized by mutual respect rather than old hierarchies of authority and obedience. The most unexpected development came nearly 2 years after Captain Harrington's intervention, when Ryan completed his Air Force technical training and reached out to me during his leave before his first deployment. "I owe you an apology," he said when we met for coffee in Chicago, where he was visiting friends. A real one, not just the half-baked message I sent before. He looked different in his Air Force uniform, more mature, more grounded than the entitled cousin I'd known. "When I enlisted, I thought I understood what you'd been through, but basic training was just the beginning. Now that I'm facing my own deployment, I realize how much I disrespected yours." "What made you enlist?" I asked, genuinely curious about the transformation in my once privileged cousin. "Honestly, watching how Uncle Rob and Aunt Linda changed after that call from your commander. Seeing how they talked about your service with real pride instead of just lip service." He hesitated. "And seeing how I'd been raised to expect everything to be handed to me while you worked for everything you achieved. I wanted to know what it felt like to earn something on my own merit." We talked for nearly 3 hours, the conversation evolving from awkward apologies to genuine connection as we discovered common ground in our military experiences. Ryan wasn't the same person who had carelessly claimed my space and possessions, just as I wasn't the same person who had left for Afghanistan never expecting to have to fight for my place in my own family. As we parted, he handed me a small package. "I found this in one of my boxes after I moved out of your room. I should have returned it sooner." Inside was my father's high school class ring, a keepsake he'd given me when I graduated, telling me it was a tradition to pass it to the eldest child. I'd thought it lost in the shuffle of my belongings, another casualty of my parents' carelessness. "Thank you," I said, genuinely moved by the gesture. "And good luck with your deployment. Stay safe out there." "I'll try," he promised. "And thanks for setting the example I needed, even if I was too self-absorbed to see it at the time." 3 years after Captain Harrington's transformative phone call, I completed my degree and accepted a full-time position with the cybersecurity firm, now specializing in protecting government and military networks. The skills I'd developed in the Army had translated perfectly to civilian life, allowing me to build a career that honored both my military service and my future goals. My parents attended my graduation ceremony, their pride evident not just in their words but in how they introduced me to their friends. "This is our daughter Samantha, the cybersecurity specialist. She served in Afghanistan before completing her degree." That evening, as we celebrated over dinner, my father raised his glass in a toast. "To Samantha, who taught us the true meaning of service, not just to country, but to truth and self-respect. My mother added her own words, and to Captain Harrington, wherever he is now, who made one phone call that changed our family forever. I smiled, thinking of how differently this day might have unfolded had Captain Harrington not taken the time to advocate for a young specialist whose family had forgotten the meaning of respect. His intervention hadn't just secured my physical space back home, it had created the opportunity for genuine transformation in relationships that had seemed permanently defined by unhealthy patterns. Later that night, in my Chicago apartment, I wrote an email to Captain Harrington, now Lieutenant Colonel Harrington, according to the military directory. We'd corresponded occasionally since my deployment ended, brief updates that maintained the connection without overstepping professional boundaries. Today I graduated with honors, I wrote. As I accepted my diploma, I thought about how different things might have been without your willingness to make that call 3 years ago. What began as a fight for my physical space became a journey toward mutual respect and understanding with my family. You didn't just help me get my room back, you helped me find my voice and my place in the world. Some officers might have dismissed my situation as insignificant compared to the mission at hand. Thank you for recognizing that a soldier's well-being extends beyond the battlefield. His reply came the next morning, characteristically straightforward but deeply meaningful. Mitchell, congratulations on your graduation. What happened with your family wasn't about my intervention. It was about your courage in speaking up, when it would have been easier to remain silent. The most important battles we fight are rarely the ones in combat. They're the ones that define our dignity and worth. You won that battle through your own strength. I merely provided tactical support. Carry on with the excellent work you've always done. Harrington. As I begin this new chapter in my life, I carry with me the lessons learned from that painful time when my bedroom was erased in my absence. I learned that respect must sometimes be demanded rather than requested. I learned that healthy relationships require both parties to see each other clearly, not through the distorted lens of family roles and expectations. Most importantly, I learned that advocating for myself wasn't selfish or ungrateful. It was an essential act of self-respect. My bedroom in my parents' house remains ready for my occasional visits, a tangible symbol of their commitment to maintaining my place in the family. But my true home exists in the life I've built for myself. A life defined by choices made from strength rather than obligation, and relationships based on mutual respect rather than outdated hierarchies. Captain Harrington's single phone call didn't just recover a physical space. It created room for all of us to grow into better versions of ourselves. And that room, unlike any bedroom, can never be taken away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.